What's up, everybody? Welcome to the CanesInSight Daily Podcast, powered by Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. It's Georgia Tech week, so we are going behind enemy lines as we do every week, talking to Chad Bishop from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Georgia Tech beat writer. He was awesome, gave us a lot of insight into Georgia Tech, into the Haynes-King situation, into a lot of questions we had about Georgia Tech, and what's been kind of a weird up and down season, but to me, a very scary game, a very dangerous team that if they can run the ball on Miami, can cause a lot of problems. Big test for Miami in Atlanta. Plus, he was dropping some Trick Daddy references, some Miami rap references, so he was well-versed. First, I want to talk about some folks that are always well-versed in the law, Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. If you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, you could be entitled to significant compensation. Dial 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733. Take back control of your life with Anajar and Levine. Pete, hop in.
Fantastic dental work,
D.
I mean, it looks like brand new, man. Give a shout out to your dentist.
I got a new one. I should have taken his name before I left. It was down in Miami. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but I thought he did a good job. The whole crew there. My lip was numb as hell. I was looking like like one of these housewives with the lip injections walking around for a while. But I think we've come back to normal here, ready to strap it up and perform here on the podcast. Chad was great. We talked to him about Georgia Tech. I know, Pete, that's to me a scary game. I'm concerned about the matchup, the way they can run the ball when they're on, and the way they can maybe control the clock against the Miami Hurricanes.
Especially if Haynes-King, especially if he plays, brings that running element to the game for them. I think, if he goes, then we'll see if he's really 100%. But I think if he plays, then he's much more viable than a couple the other options that they have there at the quarterback spot. And then defensively, especially against the run, they've been really solid as Chad gets into. Still been a little dicey against the pass, which Miami could take advantage of. But Georgia Tech always, there's been ups and downs in the series, but it seems like it's always a team that there's a threat for them to beat Miami.
Yeah, we got some breaking news we're going to get to here. First, I got to clarify something. People were calling me soft on the show yesterday because I chipped my tooth on a veggie sandwich. Just to be clear, it was a filling. It was not my actual bone of the teeth that popped. I filled it in from when I was a kid, and that's what broke. It wasn't nothing to do with my eating of plants. People were telling me to eat more meat so my teeth don't break. It was a filling. So, by the way, a lot of comments. I got a million texts. It's not a ideological, animal rights deal with the meat. I'm just trying to do this podcast as long as I can. I'm almost 40, we're getting old out here. I got to figure out how I can maintain to watch and be on this show for what could be a 5 championship run for the Canes. I'm not as young as Pete over here, so I got to keep it going for a while.
It's a lot of explaining to do for chipping your tooth on an impossible.
I was getting Villette was texting me. People were texting me. There were a lot of questions being asked about the veggie sandwich.
You need to eat. Villette has ulterior motives. He's going to tell you need to eat more stone crabs.
That's true, which you do, by the way. I'll get a free plug to Champy Seafood. He's only giving me a free stone crab. I'm giving him like thousands of dollars of free ads on this show. Free stone crabs.
That's where you go with that guy sometimes, right?
All right, but listen, some news. You probably saw it this morning. Vote of confidence from Florida's athletic director in Billy Napier, basically saying he will be back for the 2025 season. Timing's interesting because if you look at Florida's schedule, they got Texas, they got LSU, they got Ole Miss, and then Florida State, which looked like it was going to be tough. It most likely will be an easier game for Florida, but they could lose. That's right now 4-4 with those 3 games on the horizon plus FSU. Looking like a 5-7 season at best. Maybe you could pull an upset. I don't say at best, but 5-7 is the most realistic outcome, and it's potentially 4-8. So I wonder if they did this now to get ahead of the eventual negativity of, fire Billy after these losses coming up.
Yeah, that would strategically make sense, D. I mean, I think also they've probably been looking at the landscape and doing some back channeling and try to figure out who potential options could be. As we understand, Miami was probably doing with Mario Cristobal before, you make that move. But to me, that also plays into it because I just don't know if there's that many great options out there for them right now. And yes, you can say a guy like Lane Kiffin could be a good hire, but look, number one, would he leave Ole Miss? I think potentially yes, especially with the way the situation's been up and down this year. Even though they're right still in the mix if they win this weekend, right? But I think they've probably looked at the landscape and said, all right, you know what, let's give it another year here, keep the roster intact as much as possible, because they're still playing hard for him. I think, right? Keep the roster intact, chalk up, if they lose these games, look, the injuries, you don't have Eugene Wilson. There's a lot of stuff to point to if you're Billy Napier, but at the end of the day, this still comes down to him. The roster's not where it needs to be to sustain injuries like they've had. But yeah, I think a lot of it goes into what I said as well. I don't think there's that many great options out there for them right now.
I think this is very much about DJ Lagway as well. Mm-hmm. DJ Lagway, who looks like he's healthy, he's not going to be out for the season, which it looked like it might have happened with his hamstring injury last week. He's shown a lot of flashes. I know Miami, we've talked about on the show, that's a potential fit to replace Cam Ward in a much better situation with Miami's offensive line and receiving core. But he's tight with Napier. The idea is he comes back, plays for him, and maybe you can use Lagway to recruit some help through the transfer portal. Now, Florida's been terrible in the transfer portal for the past 3 years, just like they've been pretty bad at high school recruiting. So you're betting on an improvement. Lagway will help though, because people want to attach themselves to a younger player. That offensive line, you can get guys in the portal. They got guys in the portal to fix it the past 2 years, but they just haven't been good. It's one thing to get those kind of guys, another to get impact guys like Miami's done with Matt Lee, Cohen, Zach Carpenter. Miami gets good players in the portal at offensive line because they got good offensive line recruiters. I'm not sure that's changing for Florida overnight, but at least that's the plan. And their high school recruiting, look, from a Miami standpoint, I would love for Napier to get fired so we can go after Lagway, Ben Hanks, Miami's number one target at that cornerback position, along with DJ Pickett, Vernell Brown, major target at wide receiver, both Florida commits. Miami's still going to go after them with Napier or not, but I think the chances of Florida holding on, at least on paper, are stronger with Napier being there. We'll see what happens if the team starts losing. But the high school recruiting class is ranked 51st in the country. Maybe the fact that Napier is getting another year gives you more certainty with those kids. But those kids aren't just signing for 1 year; they're signing for 3 years.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. Look, if they lose out here, or if they lose to everyone except Florida State, right, and they don't pick up another one here, which would be a tall task, I think. If you're an opposing coach, obviously it does make it more likely they stick now that he's going to be there. But if you're an opposing coach, I'm saying, look, he's a dead man walking. He's getting 1 more year. You want to go there. You want to go there for another year. You could look at it both ways, because if they were to fire him and bring in someone with some energy who is able to keep them because they sell the new vision there, that might be more realistic than, you keep him now. He doesn't win any games the rest of the year, or only beats Florida State, and then you're up against, well, he's there for next year, but he's going to be gone next year, is going to be what the anti-UF recruiting message will be, right? And that's not just Miami, that's anyone else who wants kids in their class. So that will be very interesting to track 100%.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the stats here. To me, I think the biggest problem from a UF perspective is that offensive line. 67th right now in sack percentage, which actually is an improvement of where they've been in the past, but not very good. I don't see the path forward for this offensive line unless you really, really, really nail it in the portal. And there's not many teams that have just rebuilt the offensive line overnight. In the portal.
Yeah.
Miami landed 2 huge ones with Lee and Cohen. Now, Miami was already really good at offensive line recruiting. Their offensive line wasn't good because they just got here, but Cristobal and Mirabal had a track record to sell. So that made it easier. But then also on that particular team, you had an S. Cooper, who was a signee, who was better than anybody on Florida. You had Francis Mauigoa as a true freshman, who's better than anybody on Florida. And you had Jalen Rivers, who's a signee, who's better than anybody on Florida. So I don't know where the building blocks are. Offensive line, you can't just sign one guy and say you fixed your offensive line, even if it's the best offensive lineman in the portal. You need 5 guys that can play, plus some backups. And I don't see that with Florida. Lagway can cover some stuff up. You can get him a receiver. You can improve the running backs. Maybe you have some decent ones already, but you've seen it with Florida State. It's just hard to fix these things overnight when you recruited poorly in the portal in high school, outside of a DJ Lagway.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see what happens. Or I like I said earlier, I do give them credit. It seems like Florida, those guys are playing hard for Napier. Probably should have won that Tennessee game earlier in the year, which would have been pretty good for Miami. I would say it for a multitude of reasons. Not only knock Tennessee out of there, but also just kind of give that Florida win some more credence. So hopefully, they pick one up here. But also, look, we understand the recruiting ramifications if they lose all of them as well. So we'll see what happens, man. Interesting situation to track in Gainesville.
Let's talk about some guys that UF recruited. They did not land. And those guys are going to be at the Miami Hurricane team store on Monday, November 11th, 6 to 7 p.m., hopefully celebrating a victory over Georgia Tech. This is going to be, again, next Monday, November 11th, at the Miami Hurricane team store right in front of the University of Miami campus, next to the Thesis Hotel on South Dixie Highway. You got a Darius Hayes, former Gator commit, Nye Carr, who Miami landed in Georgia, not too far from where the Gators play, Simeon Barrow, unbelievable tackle, defensive tackle, and then Jalen Rivers, who, of course, Miami beat out the Gators for, Jacksonville native. So this is we want to know why Miami is where they are and why the Gators are where they are. Look at some of these recruiting victories for the Miami Hurricanes. Hayes really contributing a ton on special teams as a true freshman. Nye Carr, I keep hearing he's pushing in practice. The breakout's coming. Barrow, one of the best defensive tackles in the ACC. Jalen Rivers, one of the best offensive linemen in the ACC. Awesome event. I am sure of it. I've seen the Cam Ward event, the Restrepo event, some of the other players, the Canes Hoops event. These guys are great with the kids. You get your autographs. If you use promo code INSIGHT20, you get 20% off your first item at the store. So what's not to like? Miami Hurricane team store Monday, November 11th for the meet and greet.
All right. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We have Chad Bishop coming up next to break down this Yellow Jackets team and the season thus far. We'll see what happens on Saturday, but Chad Bishop joining us next year on the CanesInSight podcast.
All right, the weekend is almost here, so we're trying to learn a little bit more about who Miami is facing on Saturday. Nobody better than Georgia Tech beat writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Chad Bishop. Chad, how you doing?
I'm doing outstanding, fellas. How are you all?
Doing great, man. It's doing a lot better than post Georgia Tech last year. Probably the low point of the season, low point of maybe our lives aside from the personal situations.
That was a personal situation last year.
Yeah, but do a lot better, man. Do a lot better. No, we were Georgia Tech fans for a while because you guys were the only show in town that first week, and you set off what could be the collapse of the Florida State program. So I think up until this week, Georgia Tech has been pretty popular down here in South Florida.
Crazy how college football changes optics wise, right? Like Georgia Tech beats Miami on that crazy play, and then the Canes are 9-0 this year, and Georgia Tech upsets a number 10 Florida State, and things have gone off the rails there in Tallahassee. So you just never know week to week, year to year. That's why we love this game, right? I mean, it keeps us guessing year in and year out.
And we're trying to figure out this Georgia Tech team because just kind of following the box scores and checking in the games occasionally. To me, it looks like a good ball club. Obviously, had a quarterback injury, which we all know that kind of changes the season. But what is this year's version of Georgia Tech on the whole?
Still inconsistent. It's something they dealt with a lot in 2023. Like we just said, beating a team like Miami on the road, but losing to a Bowling Green at home, losing to a Boston College at home, hanging with number 1 Georgia in 2023. This year's it's sort of been the same. I mean, beat a pretty good Duke team, beat a pretty good North Carolina team, but go on the road and fall short to Syracuse, go on the road and fall short to Louisville. Just can't really string a bunch of wins together. Of course, some of that has to do with injuries. Haynes King going down. Jamal Haynes, the running back, has been banged up. But with what they had coming back offensively, I think all of us who covered Georgia Tech thought we'd see a little bit more of a consistent team. And granted, they were sitting there at 5-2, right, with a lot of things in front of them until the Haynes King injury. So I think inconsistency is still something this program is dealing with and fighting against, and Brent Key is trying to exercise from the program by building some depth and some better recruiting. But right now, they just don't have the pieces to go in week and out and continue to win 3, 4, 5 games in a row. And they only got 3 games left this season. So if any time we're to do it, the month of November would certainly be the time for this ball club.
So Chad, Brent Key's second full season in charge at Georgia Tech, and it seemed like there was some optimism before the season from the fans. Now that we're more than halfway through this thing, outside of the again, we're going to keep referencing the injury at quarterback because that plays a big part in what's happened here. But outside of that, it seems like a nice foundation has been laid by him. The offensive line is something we hear a lot about, and the trenches, play in the trenches. What is the optimism level like? Obviously, this season is what it is now at this point, but in this type of stuff that he's built the first couple of years there.
Yeah, I think it's still there, and I think part of that discussion has to go back to recruiting. I mean, right now as we talk, Georgia Tech, I think, has the third ranked class in the ACC and top 20 in the nation, right? So, like, Brent Key is recruiting at a very high level. He's doing it through the transfer portal and through the high school level. So I think a realistic fan understands that, hey, this is still only year 2. There's going to be some growing pains. He's still in the process of getting a lot of his guys in there. Yeah, this season could have been a lot better than where it stands at 5-4 right now. But again, injury bug is something that nobody can sort of prepare for, and that's taken its toll. But yeah, I think folks realistically understand that, again, like there's still some bright moments ahead for this football program, and Brent Key is doing the right thing. He's building depth and he's got to raise the talent level, and I think he understands that. Like, if you look at some of the opponents that Georgia Tech plays, like there's NFL guys on the other side of the ball. I don't know how many NFL guys Georgia Tech has right now, and so to continue to build that roster depth is key, and I think folks are optimistic that that's going to continue to happen. And I think they understand that it takes a little bit of time, especially in this portal era. So we'll see, how the roster looks next year. Someone told me in the offseason that Georgia Tech is maybe 70 to 80% to where they want to be in terms of their talent level. So they got ways to go. Again, I think smart fans understand that. They're still on board with Brent Key. They're still have a winning record right now, still on track to go to a bowl game in the second year. And so they're going to continue to build on what they have so far.
And before we get too far down the line, I don't want to bury the lead. Obviously, the story of the week, Haynes King, his health. Brent Key dropped a little breadcrumb maybe in his press conference. What do we know about Haynes King?
Yeah, for context for folks, in the game against North Carolina in Chapel Hill, Haynes King, starting quarterback, left the fourth quarter, which looked like a shoulder injury. I mean, nobody said that specifically, but, he went out doing this and sort of it was hanging a little limp. He went in the injury tent and didn't return for the final 11 minutes when Georgia Tech beat North Carolina. He did not play against Notre Dame. He did not play against Virginia Tech. He was at practice both those weeks, but he wasn't doing a whole lot. This week's been a little bit different. He's been running with the first team offense. He's been practicing a little bit. He's been out there moving around. But I think the caution is again, it's the throwing shoulder. So like, how, even if he feels 100%, is that shoulder 100%? How much can he throw? Is he afraid to get hit in that shoulder when he runs the ball? Brent Key named him a captain. That's probably a telltale sign that he's leaning toward Haynes King playing. But I don't think it's uncommon for guys to be captains who maybe don't play, or scout team members or what have you. So I think he's trending in the right direction, had a bye week to rest that shoulder after missing 2 games. And so I think there's a very, very good possibility Haynes King does play. But again, he's missed 2 games and there's been a bye week. So what's the rust? What's the level of confidence in that throwing shoulder? Time will tell.
Chad, the last couple games without Haynes King, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, not the easiest opponents in the world, but offensively, a total 19 points in those 2 games there. So let's say that Haynes King is not playing. How would you assess what the quarterback situation looks like? I know a couple of different guys have played there in his place.
Yeah, backup Zach Pyron started and played against Notre Dame, and I actually thought played pretty well. His teammates didn't do a whole heck of a lot to help him out, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Virginia Tech wasn't as good, and I think Zach Pyron also got banged up a little bit in that game. Got hit. He got hit pretty severely at the end of the Notre Dame game, and we're not sure if he was completely healthy going out in that Virginia Tech game. But I'm going to say the problem has been is this. We go back to the word inconsistency. This Georgia Tech offense returned 4 of 5 starters on the offensive line, 2 of their best wide receivers, and they just haven't been able to put it together consistency week in and week out. And this offensive line, they'll have some really great games. I mentioned the North Carolina game was outstanding, but then they can't run the ball against Notre Dame or Virginia Tech. And I wrote about that today. When they rush for 180 yards under Brent Key, they're 14-2. And when they don't, they're 2-10. I mean, they have to run the ball. So I could say the quarterback doesn't matter. That's a little bit of an understatement. But again, if they're not running the ball, I don't know if it really does matter. Now, Haynes King is a huge part of that, of running the ball, of the rushing offense. But they have got to move the ball up front. They have got to move the line of scrimmage. So if the offensive line comes to play, the importance of that quarterback level sort of goes down a little bit. And when they are struggling, that's where the quarterback play has to go up. And when you have your backup or third string quarterback in there, that's where the problems arise.
Yeah, I saw, just looking at the numbers, they ran for 245 against Duke in a good win there, and then against Carolina they ran for 371 yards.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that makes a big difference.
And I want to ask about the offensive line, and you kind of hit some of it there, but looking on paper, just looking at stats, you see the sack percentage is very, very low. So pass blocking, at least on paper, looks good. They've had these big running performances. I mean, what is this offensive line in terms of when it's playing its best? How good is it? And how do they stack up when you assess the whole season?
Yeah, when they're at their best, they're one of the best units in the conference. I mean, they led the ACC in rushing last year and only lost one guy off that offensive line. And they brought in Keelan Rutledge, a Middle Tennessee transfer, who's been one of their best run blockers, according to PFF, over the course of this season. So they could be a dominant unit. Some of those sack numbers have to do with Georgia Tech throwing the ball very quickly in short routes, but they've done an outstanding job in pass protection too. But I will say some of that is, I think, the league and opponents have adjusted as well, right? They know Georgia Tech wants to run the ball. There's been a lot of stacked boxes. There's been a lot of teams selling out against the run. And that's sort of, hindered the offensive line's ability to get push and get movement. But I know it's something that they preach and harp on constantly. I mean, Brent Key is a former offensive lineman himself. Jeep Wade's in his second year with this program as the offensive line coach. They got some veteran guys on that offensive front. So when they're humming, I mean, they're really good. You go back to the end of 2023, and I always go back to the bowl game. They beat UCF. I mean, they ran the ball like 25 straight times or something in that game, and there was nothing UCF could do about them. And same thing against Georgia and the regular season finale. I mean, they ran the ball pretty much at will against that good Georgia defense. So again, this offensive line can be very good, but it's just a matter of them clicking and putting it all together, play in and play out.
Who have been the most consistent skill position guys offensively? Obviously Jamal Haynes out of the backfield is someone that most people are familiar with. Malik Rutherford at receiver. But just talk about these guys a little bit. If you're a Miami fan, who would you be watching on Saturday?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Malik Rutherford, a guy from Miami. Nonetheless, not the biggest kid. They joke that he came to campus as a freshman weighing like 130 pounds or something. But he's caught a pass in like 25 straight games. He is Mr. Reliable. I mean, he puts his nose in there. Not too different than a Xavier Restrepo, right? Like not a guy that's going to jump off the scouting report, but he makes plays and he's consistent and he's that safety net for whoever's at quarterback there for Georgia Tech. And then at the other side of the wide receiver position is Eric Singleton Jr. He's a guy that can run over 20 miles an hour. He can stretch the field. A young kid who's also kind of small in stature, but an exceptional talent at wide receiver. So that's been some of the concern this year too, has been able to get the ball to those guys downfield for big chunk plays. They'll hand the ball off to those guys. They'll get the ball to them on bubble screens and some short passes. But if they can figure out a way to get those guys open down the field for 40, 50, 60-yard gains, that changes the dynamic of the game. But again, that's been hard to do this year.
Miami's offense, obviously the story on the Miami side this season, number one in the country in a lot of categories. Georgia Tech, again, on paper, solid unit, nothing jumps out the page. But having watched Georgia Tech and knowing where the matchups are, what's their path to success against this Miami offense?
Well, I think it's bend but don't break. Safety Clayton Powell-Lee, I think, had a good point this week. Miami's going to get theirs, right? Like Cam Ward's going to have completions and Xavier Restrepo is going to make catches and they're going to get some gains on the yard or gains in the rushing attack. I think Georgia Tech understands that, but they're having one of the better seasons they've had in a while defensively with new coordinator Tyler Santucci. And really the past couple of weeks against Notre Dame and Virginia Tech, even though those were losses, the defense played relatively well. So I think they understand that, look, hey, this is one of the best offenses in the country, if not the best offense in the country. So Don't get discouraged if you're down 7-0, 14-0. Keep fighting, keep clawing. Let these guys catch the ball, but get them down. Make them work for points. Georgia Tech, I think, has a pretty solid defense. They got Warren Burrell at cornerback and Amari Harvey at cornerback. Amari Harvey's had an exceptional year, and Warren Burrell is probably one of the better cover corners they've had in quite some time. And linebacker Kyle Eifert is probably returning from injury as well, who's their leading tackler. So I think they have the pieces to maybe contain Miami's offense. Again, no one's going to stop this offense, but if they can, force some turnovers, maybe catch some breaks on some third downs or fourth downs, that'll give them a chance. But I think they understand going in. Again, no one is really stopping this Miami defense, maybe except Miami themselves. So they've got to hope to contain them.
What would you say the strength of the defense is in terms of a particular unit or position?
Surprisingly, it's been the run defense. And again, it was one of the worst rush defenses in the country in 23, and they could not get off the field on third down either. And both those areas have been greatly improved. They really made an emphasis in the offseason to go get some guys in the portal like Marcelo Height, a one-time Miami commit, Thomas Gore, a former Miami player, Jordan Vandenberg from Penn State. They got a lot of guys who return like Zeke Biggers. They got some upperclassmen like Josh Robinson. So they run, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys on the defensive line. That's really helped them keep them fresh and really stuff the middle and stuff the run. And that's been a pleasant surprise for Tech fans because, again, they could not do that in 2023. So that's been a big surprise. They don't get after the quarterback a ton. They don't have a lot of tackles for loss. But Brent Key's admitted that's fine. That's just not who this defense is. If they can just stop the run at the line of scrimmage or for maybe a yard or two, they're going to be okay. And that's sort of where they make their hay and make their bread and butter. So that's been a huge strength for them this season.
Romello Height, man, Canes fans are very familiar with him. was committed to Miami, and then also was messing around with Miami in the portal here too. So Canes fans very familiar with him.
Sure.
Yeah, how are Height and Gore doing?
Doing great, man. We talked to Romello on Tuesday. Very, very thoughtful young man about where his career has been and where it is going. We haven't had a media availability with Thomas Gore, I don't believe, this season, but Brent Key brought him in Tuesday and gave him a bear hug during his media availability. So I know Thomas Gore is happy to be back in Atlanta after, playing some of his career at Georgia State. So I think those guys are excited to face the Canes, as I'm sure the rest of the Yellow Jackets are, and I'm sure they'll have a little bit more extra juice on Saturday than most.
Chad, obviously the biggest concern on the Georgia Tech side is the health of Haynes King, right? Put that to the side. Is there any other area of the team, like for example with Miami, the secondary, the message boards are focused on? There's always something in the media. Is there something, and the coaches, quite frankly, is there something on Georgia Tech besides got to get Haynes King healthy that's keeping fans up at night?
I would think it's probably outside of Cam Ward's ability to just make magic happen scrambling with the football. I would go back to the consistency of that run game. I think everybody who watches Georgia Tech understands if they run the ball, they have a great chance of beating anybody on the field that day. But you just don't know this season, week in and week out, what it's going to look like. I mean, there's some games where they rush 60 yards. There's some games where you mentioned they rush for 300. So I think Saturday morning when Georgia Tech fans make their way to Bobby Dodd Stadium, they're going to be hoping to God that Tech can run for like 200 yards. But I think they know in the back of their mind, if they can't, it's going to be a long day. So I think it sounds simple, but to me, that's really what this game comes down to.
My last question for you here, Chad, before I don't know, D, you have anything else? But my last question for you, you mentioned the fans, right? Noon game. What's the expectation in terms of the show? The turnout. We understand that there's probably going to be a good amount of Miami fans there. A lot of Miami fans in the Atlanta area, and a lot of people who come in from the surrounding regions. But what's the crowd expected to be like, and what's the hype like this week?
Well, it is homecoming.
Yep.
So I think that'll play a factor. The Georgia Tech students have been outstanding, really, since Brent Key took over. I mean, they have bought in big time to Brent Key. He really connects with them, being an alum. He's doing his radio show Thursday night on campus. He did it previously this year from a frat house. like the kids love him, and he loves the kids, like Trick Daddy said. Trick Daddy loves the kids. Brent Key loves the kids, and so
Miami reference.
Yeah, for sure, man. They were listening to a little Rick Ross at practice this week too. So Now the general public, though, I think there's still some fence sitters. Not to say that they're not bought in, but not necessarily willing to maybe spend their money to go downtown and see Tech play in person quite yet every single Saturday. Now, I think noon helps. Big Boy is giving a pregame concert, so that'll be a big thing. Like I think it's going to be a raucous atmosphere. Will it be like a sold out crowd? I don't know about that, but I think the chance for Georgia Tech fans to see a possible upset of the number 4 team in the country is going to bring some people in. So I think it should be a pretty good atmosphere there on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, last one for me and Chad. You've been very generous with your time. We appreciate it. It is a granular question. Just 'cause I'm curious. The pace of play for Georgia Tech with this Miami offense, teams have generally tried to play at a much slower pace, control the game, keep Miami's offense off the field because they've basically been scoring on everybody. Is that how Georgia Tech typically plays? Is that how they want to play? What's their typical pace of play?
I think they probably would definitely want to play at a slower pace against opponent like Miami. I think they're adaptable, though. I mean, Georgia Tech is a team that can have a high-tempo, high-paced offense as well with offensive coordinator Buster Faulkner. But when they have success, man, they really sort of slow it down and put together these 8 to 12-minute drives. So a lot of plays will go for it on 4th down. I think that's more than anything more how they want to play as opposed to how they want to play Miami, if that makes sense, right? Like if Georgia Tech is having success, they're going to control the clock, control the ball. That's what they did when they had success in 23. That's what they did this year when they have success. So I think it's more about them having success as opposed to what can we do to keep Miami's offense off the field. Again, we go back to the offensive line and the ground game and the health of Haynes King. If those guys are all clicking, they're going to keep the ball for a long time. They're going to drain the clock. Brent Key always says he wants to destroy the will of the opponent to still be out there to keep going. And that happens by keeping your offense on the field. So I think that's definitely how they prefer for this game to go.
Chad Bishop, man, great stuff. Again, Canes fans, follow him here at Mr. Chad Bishop on Twitter. Check him out with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, all his work covering Georgia Tech. Great having you, Chad. Appreciate your insights on the team. And let's see, man, Canes fans they're a little nervous about this one because of what happened last year. It seems like this series has some weird things that happens in it for sure, but should be a good one on Saturday in Atlanta.
Indeed. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate it.
Take care, Chad.
This an insight to the Canes, and you know we ain't playing no games. Joaquin said dominate, so that's what we do. Home of the legends and 7th floor crew. Down in Miami where hurricanes brew. You here for the rumors, we bring you the news. Cause it's all about the you. And nobody do it like CanesInSight. 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 It's CanesInSight.